Okay, we're going to continue here in Luke chapter 22 today. We're going to begin in verse 39, and we'll just go as far as we can. There's an awful lot that's going on here. There's some really fun things to note about this particular chapter as we go through it. So first of all, again, if you have a synopsis where you've got Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John side by side, there's going to be an awful lot of stuff that as Luke is following the Mark and Matthean passion narrative, he just omits. There's just a ton of stuff that gets omitted. There are a few things that do either come from his source or that he's editorialized in. We're going to look at a textual variant today and discuss that. And then we're going to note as well, there's some interesting parallels in Luke's passion narrative and the Johannine passion narrative. Now, we'll notice a couple of these today, but they leave scholars a little bewildered. Because while it's easy to talk about the Matthew, Mark, Luke relationship in terms of the framework of the passion narrative, that raises the question, then why does Luke's tradition seem to have these particular pieces of data that are also found in the Johannine tradition and not the Markan or Matthean tradition? So we'll leave that for a minute till we come to the textual variant, and then we can discuss that a little bit more. But as we begin with verse 39, Luke records, and he came out and went as was his custom. That's added, as was his custom. That's added to Mark and Matthew. And we'll remember that for Luke, Jesus goes to the synagogue as was his custom. So that's a Lucan editorial piece there. And it says, and the disciples followed him. Now, Mark and Matthew are both going to note very specifically that we're dealing here with Peter, James, and John. But Luke omits the names and just simply has the disciples following Jesus to the place where he's going to pray in this olive orchard known as Gethsemane. And Luke's bit here about Gethsemane is quite small compared to the Mark and Matthean traditions, because in both Mark and Matthew, Jesus repeatedly comes back to the disciples, Peter, James, and John. 3 times he comes back to them, and on the 3rd time he just finally gives up. But you don't have that repetition in Luke. It's just simply that he comes to the Mount of Olives and he says to the disciples, pray that you may not enter into the test. Now here the word is peirasmos. It's the same word that's used in lead us not to the test in the Lord's Prayer. The test, the peirasmos, is an eschatological term. It refers to that renunciation of Jesus that takes place in times of persecution. And Jesus is saying, pray that you don't fall into this eschatological test, okay? But there's another side to this test as well. Jesus will pass the test. Peter won't. So he says, pray that you don't enter into the test. Now, please remember, just before this, Jesus has told Peter he's going to deny him 3 times. And Jesus has told Peter that Jesus has told Peter he's going to strengthen him so that after the calamity, Peter will be able to encourage the brothers and sisters. Luke continues, he withdrew from them about a stone's throw. I don't know if they're thinking Tom Brady kind of throw or what, is that 50, 60 yards? What are we dealing with there? I mean, it's a ways away. I'm guessing perhaps 20, 30 yards. He knelt down and prayed. Father, if you're willing, remove this cup from me. Nevertheless, not my will, but yours be done. Now, in the Mark and Matthean narratives, there's more material there where Jesus is talking about his soul being troubled and even to death. But here, he goes a little further. He falls on the ground, it says, in Mark and Matthew, and he prays. Whereas in Luke, it's just more decorous. He just simply kneels down and he prays that short little prayer, Father, if it's possible, let this cup pass from me. But nevertheless, not my will, but your will be done. And when he rose from prayer, he came to his disciples, found them sleeping, and Luke adds the words, for reasons of sorrow. Now, I'm curious here, what do they have to be sorrowful about? What do they really have to be sorrowful about? They've just celebrated Passover with Jesus. They think it's the end of days. They think that any moment now could be the moment that the end time struggle begins. What do they have to be sorrowful about? Why would Luke add that small detail that he found them sleeping because they were grieving? Grieving what? And I don't know. The commentators are of no help here, but I thought I would leave that one with you, and we'll discuss that. And then again, he says, rise and pray that you don't enter into the test. But of course, they don't rise and pray, and they do end up entering into the test. And again, Mark and Matthew are going to repeat this 2 more times. And Luke now omits all of that, has Jesus saying, rise, pray you don't enter into the test. And while he was still speaking, there came a crowd. And the man called Judas, one of the 12, was leading them. It doesn't say anything like Mark and Matthew do about this crowd. Doesn't give you any context for this crowd. Matthew and Mark both make it clear we're dealing with swords and clubs and chief priests and elders of the people. So we're dealing with some sort of temple police is what we're dealing with. Luke has none of that. And Luke just simply has Judas come up and kiss him. Now, the response in each of the Gospels is quite different. In Mark, after Judas greets Jesus, greets him with a kiss, it says he kissed him and they laid hands on him and seized him. That's it. There's no conversation. There's nothing. Judas just simply says, Master, gives them a greeting. Boom, they surround Jesus and they are going to take him away. And Matthew has, hail, Master, and he kissed him. And Jesus said to him, friend, why are you here? Then they came up and laid hands on Jesus and seized him. Luke has this. He turns this into a Christological text. He drew near to Jesus to kiss him, but Jesus said to him, so there's no kiss. The kiss is stopped. Jesus said to him, Judas, would you betray the Son of Man with a kiss? So Luke has brought in now the Son of Man concept right into the heart of this betrayal episode. Now, Jesus has been seized. Luke records, and when those who were about him saw what would follow, namely, they're going to take Jesus away, they said, Lord, shall we strike with the sword? So in Luke, the disciples are going, Lord, is this okay? Just give us the word, and we're going to rescue you. Now, Mark and Matthew don't have that, okay? Mark, Matthew, and the writer of the fourth gospel, in, again, one of these narratives that you find in all 4 gospels here, has one of the disciples, unnamed in the synoptic tradition, but in John chapter 18, this disciple is Peter. stretching out his hand, cutting off the ear of one of the high priest's servants. This slave is given a name only in the Gospel of John. Now, in Mark and in Matthew, after the ear is cut off, Jesus says something to the disciples: put your sword in its place. All who live by the sword will die by the sword. This is Matthew. Don't you think I can appeal to the Father and he will send me 12 legions of angels? In Mark, the response to the cutting off of the high priest's servant's ears, Jesus said to the police, have you come out against me as though I was a revolutionary terrorist? That's the word lestes here, okay? A zealot nationalist. Day after day I was with you teaching in the temple, and you didn't arrest me then. And in Luke, they cut off the high priest's ear. Jesus says, no more of this. And he touched his ear and healed him. Only in Luke is the servant's ear healed. One wants to ask, why? Why does Luke bring this detail to bear in the narrative? And now I'm not saying it's historical. I don't think it was. Okay? If the synoptic tradition and the Johannine tradition simply preserve the tradition of the ear being cut off, if the ear had been healed, you would think it would have made it deeper into the historical record. But it doesn't. I think this is Luke showing that the Son of Man, who had authority to heal way back when, is the one who is being betrayed, and he heals the servant's ear. And in addition to the day after day I was with you in the temple, the Lucan writer says, but this is your hour and the power of darkness. So for Luke, as we come to this climax, he sees this particular time as a time that darkness is reigning, okay? Now we have Jesus doing this whole, God is reigning, God is reigning, God is reigning, God is reigning. I'm curious as to why this writer seems to think that it's the time of the power of darkness, especially when you consider that, for example, the Johannine writer did not consider that Jesus' hour was the death of the power of darkness. Jesus takes the darkness with him on the cross. Or in Paul's language, Jesus takes sin, death, the devil, and the Torah with him on the cross. So this is the piece of the narrative now where we move into Jesus on trial. And we're going to have two separate trials, one before Pilate, one before Herod. And the Pilate trial is split in two. In Luke 22, beginning in verse 54, they seized him and led him away, bringing him into the high priest's house. If you have any idea of the temple structure in your mind, you'll note that one portion, one corner of it is where the high priest is going to dwell. Then there's a whole other corner on the other side, Fortress Antonia, where Pilate dwells. So when Jesus is being passed back and forth between the Sanhedrin and Pilate, it's a walk across the length of the top of the temple there. However, it was perhaps a football field's length. And then the visit to Herod would be to Herod's palace there. So let's continue. Peter follows at a distance. They kindle a fire in the middle of the courtyard. And now comes the epic scene of the betrayal of Peter. 3 times he's asked, or he's queried as to whether he was with Jesus. 3 times he says no. Again, the synoptic accounts give you different reasons for this. And it's the Matthean account that specifically says, we can tell by your Galilean accent. And that gets Peter really miffed, you know. It'd be like a Southerner trying to hide out in a crowd on New Year's Eve in New York City, convincing you that they weren't really from Georgia, y'all. It's just the way we speak in that part of Brooklyn. So there's this fire. The maid sees him. He denies it. She says, "You're one of them." He says, "I am not." Somebody else comes. This guy's a Galilean, you can tell. And immediately, Luke records, while he's denying Jesus, the cock crows. And then there is another Lucan addition to the narrative. It says, "And the Lord turned and looked at Peter." Again, not the other narratives, just this narrative. So you have here now this absolute betrayal, the fulfillment of this prophecy. Jesus turns around in Luke's narrative, looks at Peter. It's a kind of, I suppose it's an "I told you so" look. And all three Gospels record this sentence. "And Peter remembered the word of the Lord, how he said to him, 'Before the cock crows today, you will deny me 3 times.'" It says, "And he went out and wept bitterly." Now, immediately following the fulfillment of this prophecy, which had been given to Peter about his betrayal, when Peter's the big man, he's the strong man, he's the "here are 2 swords, here's the we'll cut off his ear," he's the "I'll go with you to death, Lord." All of this comes now. The men who are holding Jesus mock him, beat him, blindfold him, and ask him to prophesy. "Who is it that struck you?" They spoke many other words against him. They reviled him. When the day came, so they're doing this all night long, folks, all night long. This takes time. When the day came, the assembly of the elders of the people gathered together, both the chief priests and the scribes, and they led him away to their council. Now, Mark and Matthew are going to give you a trial sequence where witnesses are brought forward and they can't quite remember what Jesus said, and some of the witnesses contradicted other witnesses. Luke omits all of that and goes straight for the jugular. "And they said, 'If you are the Messiah, tell us.'" So you have this Christological confession to be elicited. Now, here's Mark. "Are you the Messiah, the Son of the Blessed?" Here's Matthew. "I adjure you by the living God, tell us if you are the Messiah, the Son of God." And then in Luke, "If you are the Messiah, tell us." So in Matthew, it's an adjuration. In Mark, it's a question. And in Luke, it is also a question, or at least a statement expecting a response. Now, in both Matthew and Luke, you have different answers. The Markan answer is "I am," ego eimi. It's a confession. The Matthean response is "That's what you say." The Lucan response is, "If I tell you, you will not believe. And if I ask you, you will not answer." We've seen that kind of riposte before in the John the Baptist, "Whose authority is it, from heaven or earth?" Well, if you're not going to tell me, I'm not going to tell you. And, he moves on, and each now of the synoptic gospels have this: "From now on, you will see the Son of Man seated at the right hand of the power of God." Mark and Matthew just simply have "at the right hand of power." Luke adds "of God," the power of God. And in the Lucan narrative, there's an omission of "and coming with the clouds of heaven." So for Luke, the trial narrative has nothing to do with the eschatological early Christian belief in the return of Jesus. For Luke, this has everything to do with his being seated at the right hand of the Father. And of course, we know that if we were to follow this out past Luke 24 into Acts chapter 1 and 2, the primary emphasis is not on the resurrection, but the ascension of Jesus to the right hand of power. So the argument here is, they all said, "Are you the Son of God?" in Luke. Now here's another question comes for the Lucan crowd, and his response is the same as the Matthean. "That's what you say." And they said, "What further testimony do we need? We've heard it from his own lips ourselves." Now we move to the accusations and the trial before Pilate. I think that's, mark my pages correct. Yeah. "Then the whole company of them arose and brought him before Pilate. And they began to accuse him, saying, 'We found this man perverting our nation and forbidding us to give tribute to Caesar, and saying that he himself is Messiah, a king.'" None of that in Mark or Matthew. None of that. Okay. In Mark or Matthew, and Pilate asked him, boom, straight up. Jesus brought before Pilate. Pilate asked a question. In Matthew, it's Jesus stood before the governor, and the governor asked him, meaning Pilate. And the question that is posed here is identical in all three synoptic gospels. "Are you the king of the Jews?" It's identical straight across. In fact, in all four gospels, this is the question that Pilate asks: "Are you the king of the Jews?" And in each case, in the synoptic gospels, the answer is the same. "That's what you say." Now, the synoptic Mark and Matthew narratives continue with other accusations, and Pilate says in the Mark and Matthew narratives, "Do you have any other charges to make?" And they evidently do. And Pilate said to the chief priests and the multitudes, this is Luke, "I find no crime in this man." This is where things are going to get screwed up. Now, in terms of mimetic theory, we've been watching the development of contagion throughout this passion narrative. We saw Satan enter into Judas. We saw the disciples fighting with each other. Who's the greatest? We see that they're still interpreting or misinterpreting Jesus when it comes to violence and nonviolence and the two-sword saying. We've seen the contagion affect the chief priests and the elders. Okay, we've begun to see it infect the disciples because they flee. This contagion continues to spread and spread and spread, and they're almost at the point of unanimity. And what do you need? You need unanimity. And the moment Pilate says, "I find no crime in this man," he's absolutely going to destroy the project. Okay? It's going to come to an abrupt end, because without Pilate, there cannot be the unanimity necessary, either, quote, legally or socially, in order for Jesus to be put to death. Now, Luke records that Pilate said to the chief priests, "I find no crime in this man," but they were urgent, saying, "He stirs up the people, teaching throughout all Judea, from Galilee even to this very place." Now, you're reading Luke's gospel, you're very aware of what Jesus has been teaching, haven't you? And you're aware that nowhere in Luke's gospel does Jesus appear as a violent revolutionary. Nowhere can it be said that Jesus forms disciples and followers in order to engage in brigandage or attacks of the rich. You don't find any of that. You know better as a reader of Luke's gospel. So when they are making this accusation, he stirs up the people. it's a false accusation, just as the testimonies in the Mark and Matthean narratives were incongruent. So here we have a lie. Now, in a peculiar episode only found in the Lucan Passion narrative, and this could come from the L source, it could. It said, when Pilate heard this, he asked whether the man was a Galilean. And when he learned that he belonged to Herod's jurisdiction, he sent him over to Herod. And this is an easy way to get out of it. This is not my jurisdiction. This belongs to Herod. You take this to Herod, who was himself in Jerusalem at that time, of course, for the feast. Now, when Herod saw Jesus, now we remember Herod's reaction, don't we, earlier in the text? When Herod got scared, who is this Jesus? Some say he's John the Baptist raised from the dead. You know, we've seen Herod's reaction already. We've seen Jesus refer to Herod as that fox in the coin saying. Now here it says, when Herod saw Jesus, he was very glad, for he had long desired to see him, because he heard about him. And he was hoping to see some sign done by him. If you remember Jesus Christ Superstar, when Jesus walks in, Herod says, show me a miracle, walk across my swimming pool, right? So that's what Herod's looking for here. So he questioned Jesus at some length, but Jesus did not reply. Now we have Jesus replying to Pilate, but Jesus will not say a word before Herod, not one. The true king remains silent. The false king is doing all of the grilling. It's almost a scene reminiscent of the inquisitor in Dostoevsky. After 15 thick pages of inquisition telling Jesus, go away. We don't need you. We don't want you. You're just going to upset the system. This is that same kind of scene here. And the chief priests and the scribes stood by vehemently accusing him. They're just throwing everything out they can, hoping something sticks to the wall. And Herod with his soldiers treated him with contempt and a mocked tone. Then arraying him in gorgeous apparel, he sent him back to Pilate. So what does Herod do? Herod takes the beaten, bloody Jesus that won't speak to him and puts royal regalia on him, sends him to Pilate as a king. Now, we're going to read a verse here that is one of René Girard's favorites. It says, and Herod and Pilate became friends with each other that very day. For before that, they had been at enmity with each other. And René loves to point out how you have these two enemies who come together to focus their anger and hostility on Jesus, and they use that mechanism to reconcile. This is not historically true, friends. Pilate has a very challenging tenure in Palestine until he's finally tossed out. He's a very dictatorial and whimsical at that leader. The Pilate that we see in Josephus does, do the kinds of things like mingling Galileans' blood with their sacrifices. I mean, that's Pilate. I don't want to use any modern analogies, because I just don't want to do that, but leaders like this. So we have that lovely little insertion here. Mimetically, what are we dealing with? We are dealing with the scapegoating phenomenon right here. And here's proof. The two biggest leaders in the country that hate each other's guts are now going to be friends because they agree that Jesus is trouble. Now, only in Luke do we have this next piece. Pilate called the chief priests, the rulers, and the people and said to them, you brought me this man as one who was perverting the people. And after examining him before you, Behold, I did not find this man guilty of any of your charges against him. Neither did Herod, for he sent him back to us, Romans. Behold, nothing deserving of death has been done by him. I will therefore chastise him and release him. Again, Pilate is muddying the waters of the mechanism. He has the authority to stop this whole process. And then we come to this fascinating episode that in Mark and Matthew has this long prelude about a man named Barabbas. And evidently Barabbas was in prison, according to the Markan narrative, for insurrection and murder. I mean, he was a terrorist, folks. He was a terrorist. He'd been caught, okay? The same thing in the Barabbas narrative. Now, Pilate is the one that asks the question in the Markan and Matthean episodes, who do you want me to release to you, knowing you have a custom, Barabbas or Jesus, who's called Messiah? And we know that Pilate will eventually release Barabbas, but there's a number of things that are going on here that are key. Number one, Barabbas in Aramaic means son of the father, Bar Abba, the son of the father. So who do you want me to release? The son of the father, that you see the play on words there, or Jesus the Messiah? Who's to get released? Knowing that the true son of the father is Jesus the Messiah. This is something we know as readers. But in Luke, it's not Pilate who asked this question, trying to get out of it, wriggle out of it even more. It's they, the chief priests, the scribes, the Pharisees, the council, everybody was there. They cried out together, away with this man and release to us Barabbas. So the Pilate equation taken out of Luke, because for Luke, Pilate's already been, his hands are clean. He finds nothing wrong with this, with Jesus. And it is the crowd now that bears the burden and asks for Barabbas. Pilate addressed them once more, desiring to release Jesus. That's Luke. Pilate addressed them once more. Now, why is this? When is Luke writing? He's writing still when Rome is very, very powerful. He's writing around the time, perhaps, of Domitian at the end of the 1st century. Okay, Roman Empire is Roman Empire. And we know from the book of Acts that the burden of the problems that are suffered by the early church and Paul come from Jewish religious leadership. And Rome is almost kind of left out of the picture as being responsible, at least in the Lucan frame of things, not necessarily so in the others. It is therefore all the more important that the Nicene Creed very, very clearly says that Jesus suffered under Pontius Pilate. He suffered under Pontius Pilate. Empire is named very, very clearly in the Creed. So he asked them a third time, why? What evil has he done? I found no crime in him, but they were urgent, demanding with loud cries that he should be crucified. And then Luke adds the very, very sad note. It doesn't say Pilate's reply. You have the crowd in Matthew and in Mark and in Luke demanding Jesus be crucified, and then Luke adds, and their voices prevailed. The mob voice, the mob spirit is now finally pulled Pilate in line with them, and now the destruction can begin. So Pilate will take Jesus and they'll strip him down. They'll put a crown of thorns upon his head, the purple cloak on him, indicating royalty. And they'll begin to salute him. Hail, King of the Jews. And again now, they strike him with a reed, and they spit upon him, and they kneel down in homage again. And when they'd mocked him, they stripped the purple cloak off, put his own clothes back on him. So we continue. Pilate gave sentence that their demand should be granted. Now we run into a historical conundrum here, because the question arises whether the Jewish Sanhedrin had the right to impose the death penalty. So when you get into the literature on this, you'll find that there's a good percentage of scholarship that is going to make an argument that the Sanhedrin did not have the right to bring the death penalty. Okay, that was for the Roman authorities only, and that's why they have to bring this death sentence to Rome, to get authority for it. But it also raises the question as to whether a capital case would be tried the night after the Passover was eaten, because now you're in a holy season, a feast time. However you finagle this, the bottom line reality is that the religious authorities bring about the process of crucifying Jesus, but Pilate gives in. He consents to the death of Jesus, just to get rid of this mob, this whole crowd that is demanding blood. So Pilate authorized Jesus to be crucified. He released the man, Barabbas, who'd been thrown into prison for insurrection and murder, whom they asked for. But Jesus, he delivered up to their will. The next piece of the Passion narrative is not to be found in Luke, and this is where the soldiers lead Jesus into the praetorium, and the scourging by the Roman soldiers begins. And then we come to the pericope. They led him away. Now I want to note a couple of things here. I'm going to read you the Markan narrative. And they led him out to crucify him. And they compelled a passerby, Simon of Cyrene, who was coming in from the country, the father of Alexander and Rufus. I have to turn the page. To carry his cross. Matthew. And they led him away to crucify him. As they went out, they came upon a man of Cyrene, Simon by name, the man they compelled to carry his cross. Here's Luke. As they led him away, they seized one Simon of Cyrene, who was coming in from the country, and they laid on him the cross to carry it behind Jesus. Did you notice in the Markan narrative, they compelled Simon Cyrene, the father of Alexander and Rufus? Why would Mark include a detail like that in his Passion account? Are we dealing with the same Alexander and Rufus mentioned in Romans chapter 16? In other words, this Simon of Cyrene, who is very clearly named across the Gospels, even though Matthew and Luke have omitted his parentage, is a well-known figure in the early church, and would have been the only one that could actually say, I carried Jesus' cross for a little bit. You with me on this? So you have this story, and now in Luke, and only in Luke, do we have. And there followed him a great multitude of people, and of women who wailed and lamented. But Jesus, turning to them, said, "Daughters of Jerusalem, do not weep for me, but weep for yourselves and for your children. For behold, the days are coming when they will say, blessed are the barren, and the women that never bore children, and the breasts that never gave suck. Then they will begin to say to the mountains, fall on us, and to the hills, cover us. For if they do this when the wood is green, what will happen when it is dry?" And then we have the recognition that two other criminals also were led away to be put to death with Jesus. This emphasis on the daughters of Jerusalem harkens back to all the women's stories that we have in Luke. From the woman in Luke chapter 7 to the women supporting Jesus in chapter 8, to the women in the parable of the unjust judge or the lost coin, the Mary and Martha narratives. They're just, Luke populates his gospel with women. And of course, it will be the women who bring the resurrection message. And it is the women in the infancy narratives that are highlighted. So again, we're looking at an author for whom women play as significant a role in the life of Jesus as the men do. And in some cases, they perhaps play an even more important role. We don't have anything about women betraying Jesus. We don't have anything about women denying Jesus. We don't have any of that kind of thing. It's just the male followers that seem to do this. And they brought him to a place called the Skull, where they crucified him. Mark and Matthew have Jesus being offered wine at this point, an anesthetic, because it's going to hurt like hell. And he refuses that. He enters into this pain, the same pain he's been in all night now, except he's got nails through his hands and his feet, and he is going to have trouble breathing. I don't know if you're familiar with crucifixion in the ancient world. There's a wonderful book by Martin Hengel on this. He noted that the verb to crucify, or the noun crucifixion, or the word cross, was never uttered from a Roman's lips. Okay, it was the most heinous way to die. It normally took days, and it's a slow suffocation process. You push up on your feet to breathe in, you let down on your wrists to breathe out. It's pain. It's just constant pain. And so it's a long process. Plus you got the birds coming at you. You got whatever you're getting from the crowds. I mean, it's a horrendous process. So the Romans wouldn't even utter that word. It would be, I guess it would be like going into a Pentecostal holiness church and saying fuck, it's just not going to go over. It's just a word you don't do. You don't do that. You don't say that word. And so this is how they would keep the horror of it away from themselves by not even saying the word. But now we're about to experience this horrid thing in all of its terror. So they put one criminal to one side of Jesus, they put another one to the other side, and it is at this point that Jesus says, Father, forgive them, they don't know what they do. And now I need to talk about two textual variants. A textual variant is a saying or a word, could be a verse, could be a couple of verses, that appear in some manuscripts, but aren't in others, okay? Or you can have a textual variant that appears in some manuscripts, but quite different in other manuscripts. Let me give you an example. And do they mean something? Yeah, they do mean something. In Romans chapter 5, verse 1, you have, having therefore been justified by faith, we have peace with God. Now, the verb to have in Greek is echo. We have is echomen. Now, some scribes heard this when somebody was uttering, they were there. You got your scribes lined up with their pens, quills, and their scrolls, and somebody's dictating so they can make copies of this letter to the Romans, and they're writing, and the lector gets up there, after having said, dikaiosthentes, having been justified, te piste, by faith, echomen to theo. Now, some of those scribes heard echomen with an omicron, which makes that an indicative verb. We have peace with God. Other scribes heard echomen with an omega. Let us have peace with God. So having been justified by faith, do we have peace, or is peace something that comes other than through being rectified with God? You with me on this? Okay. So textual variants, they can mean things. Well, in this case, in terms of textual variants, Father, forgive them. They don't know what they're doing. The editors of the Greek Testament have changed their minds throughout the years. They're uncertain as to whether or not this would have been in the original Lucan manuscripts. Some suggest that it's the saying in the book of Acts that is now brought into the gospel in certain parts of the manuscript tradition. But when I look at this particular saying, and if I'm willing to at least acknowledge that the actual textual tradition itself is uncertain enough that I could go either way, based upon at least the textual tradition, I can make a case for and against. One of the things that leads me to believe this is an authentic saying is the use of Abba, Father. The second is the very thing that Jesus has been announcing throughout the Lucan narrative as this new prophet like Moses, and that's forgiveness. Father, forgive them. And then the insight. They don't know what they're doing. Now, we have a similar Pauline insight in 1 Corinthians. If the principalities and powers had known what they were doing, they never would have crucified him. They would have just left him be and die of old age, because then he doesn't become a world changer. But they don't know what they're doing. So when I see this particular insight, I have one of two things I have to do. I either have to attribute the insight of the distinction between action and intention either to Jesus or to Paul. Did Luke pick this up in the Pauline tradition? Father, forgive them. They don't know what they're doing. We certainly know the ignorance of the crowds looms large in both the Jesus tradition and in the early church as well. So, I tend to read this, and if I'm going to fall on one side of the fence, I'm going to say I think it should be attributed to the historical Jesus, and particularly that insight that separates action from intention. It's, as Girard calls it, the first literary allusion to the non-conscious. But whether or not that is your particular view or not, you can make up your own mind on that. Now, before we get to the casting of lots and garments and the importance of that, when we go back to chapter 22, in the Gethsemane narrative, some of you will notice that you go from verse 42, Father, if you're willing, remove this cup from me, to verse 45, and when he rose from prayer. And you'll notice that verses 43 and 44 are omitted. Why is that? Okay, so Luke 22, verses 43 and 44, If you don't have those in your Bible or in a footnote, that text reads thus. Where's my, here it is. There appeared to him an angel from heaven, strengthening him. And being in agony, he prayed more earnestly, and his sweat became like great drops of blood falling on the ground. Are we dealing here with a piece of historical tradition, or are we dealing here with Lucan or other redaction in terms of the narrative? Now, again, the textual actual apparatus gives this a C reading. You can go either way. You can include it in the text, you can delete it from the text. There's good basis for both. But what I noted is that the part of the textual tradition that includes it is the Asia Minor tradition. The manuscripts that would come out of, say, the Ephesus region. The reason I think that's curious is because it's only in that region that we have blood and water equated in the Johannine narrative tradition. And here these drops of sweat fall like blood. They're just, it's as though he's cut his head and he's bleeding. He's sweating so hard it's just pouring off his forehead in this. Now, is this historical? Well, there's another piece here that's really important. That comes from the Epistle to the Hebrews that seems to be actually referencing this. Let me read you from Hebrews chapter 5, verse 7 and 8. Well, verse 7. During his earthly life, Christ offered both requests and supplication with loud cries and tears to the one who was able to save him from death. That sounds, the only thing that sounds like is the Gethsemane narrative in those little Lucan verses that are omitted in some manuscripts. You with me on this? So if in fact they are historical, note where they are located. They are located in literature, Hebrews and the Gospel of John, which are both extremely well-developed theological pieces of literature. And in Luke, which is, I don't want to say of the synoptics, he's the most sophisticated. That would be the wrong way to put it. But again, there are those pieces of that Lucan Passion narrative that do connect over with the Johannine tradition. So I'm wondering about the overlay of the Hebrew Gospel tradition and the Johannine tradition, and then Luke's use of the Hebrew Gospel tradition and potential links to the Johannine community. There's some just strange aberrations that occur in the text that make you wonder. But I wanted to just call your mind to both those readings. We know in the Markan narrative of the temptation, it says angels came and strengthened him, and he was with wild animals. Is our text here, somehow copying that and bringing it back, so that in both these scenes where there's this battle with the Satan, there's also an angelic presence to strengthen him. I don't know, but I'll leave that there. I think, if I go any further, we're just going to keep, because I was going to hope to get through the entire crucifixion narrative, but we'll halt there for now. Okay, your turn. One thing I didn't do that I thought would be fun, somebody might want to do this. is to work the Lucan Passion narrative, starting with the arrest and seeing if there's any chiastic structures. I would think there would be. I'm almost positive there would be.
Seeing as nobody else is jumping in, I'm just wondering, with that Luke 22:44, especially, that you're probably aware that James Allison has made quite a bit about how the crucifixion, I think it's mostly in John he takes it from, is that process is like a reverse creation. It's like a decreation.
Yes.
And then you have the new creation.
Yes, I see that in the Tetelestai saying it is finished, meaning the old creation is finished. The true Son of Man has been revealed, the true human, and now that's over, and then the new one begins. Yeah, the resurrection.
And so that reference in 22:44 to the sweat and the blood is like the Adama, or
that's
the
right.
blood returning to the earth. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Yeah, I mean I mean I can understand why they question it, because it's not found in Sinaiticus or Vaticanus, Washingtonius. Marcion doesn't have it, and Marcion's important because he's an early witness to Lucan textual tradition. Clement doesn't have it. Origen doesn't have it. The Syriac manuscripts, the Coptic manuscripts don't have it, but the Diatessaron does. So, I don't. I mean, it's intermingled in the tradition so well that it either got in there real early, or it's historical. It's authentic to the original writing, but it's very Johannine, I think. Although John doesn't have much to do with angels.
Sorry, just one other thing. You mentioned there's a reference, a similar reference, the Father forgive them in Acts.
Yeah, the Stephen speech.
Sorry?
The Stephen speech.
Oh, okay.
Acts 8,
yeah.
verse doggone it.
It's Acts 7, actually, I think.
Yeah. It's got to be Acts 7. Did you find the verse?
Yeah, 60. It's the very last verse. Lord, do not hold the sin against them.
That's right. Lord, do not hold this sin against them. Yeah. Which doesn't quite have the powerful import of being able to discern between action and consciousness and non-consciousness. Should have, when I was over there in Act 7, I should have checked to see if. No, there's no real, yeah, that's, yeah, okay, yeah. Next, anybody? Okay. Big picture now. Look at the sheer process that starts off Palm Sunday with a crowd cheering on Jesus, turning that whole same crowd, well, now turning on Jesus. We have all the marks of mythology in this narrative, as Girard puts it in the second or third chapter of the book of the scapegoat, the 4 marks that are necessary for one to discern this process. They're all here. False accusations, the contagion, the mimetic contagion, the unanimity of all against one. And the irony of that all against one, that one is for all. So the one who is for everyone is the one whom everyone's against. We're so familiar with this narrative. I think it's hard for us to understand the power of what's being revealed here about this innocent figure. You know, I mean, let me just ask a couple of quick questions. When you read your newspapers, and those newspapers say the police caught so-and-so for committing such and such a crime, and the person goes to trial and declaiming their innocence, and the jury still convict them, send them to prison, and then some of them are sentenced to death row, and then they die. Do you believe what is said to you in the media about these people? Yes or no? Do you believe Jeffrey Dahmer killed all those people? Charlie Manson? Right? Sure we do. We do, because they tell us. They say, we got all this evidence. We're going to do a trial. But has it not been demonstrated literally how many thousands, if not tens of thousands, of African-American men have been incarcerated in the prison system by corrupt police, corrupt juries, and corrupt judges? And how many of those? Aren't you watching the news these days where all these prisoners through the DNA Project are being released from crimes they could never have committed? So the thing is, we do believe what the news tells us, right? We in the West, who's the bad guy? Mr. Putin. We believe what the news tells us, what our news tells us. I'm not saying he's not a bad guy. I'm not saying he's a good guy. I'm not saying anything about him. I'm just asking the question about in the West. And we saw what happened the last presidential election with both sides, alleged sides of our fourth estate, of our supposed free press, twisting everything. Twisting everything. Why do we believe the voice of the crowd?
What I think I hear you say is that the fourth estate has become the mouthpiece of the crowd rather than the mouthpiece
of free independent journalism.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, we don't want that machine turned against us.
That's right.
It's a lot more convenient for us to just keep our mouth shut.
Yeah, and when we do so, are we not in Peter's position? Well, I don't want to get involved. Keep me out of this. It's scary to stand up for someone who has been accused of heinous crimes, if you believe they're innocent, to say so. It's very dangerous.
I think that it's definitely, if you're part of a community and if you align yourself with somebody who's been labeled as the enemy, you're essentially equated to that enemy as well. So you're just risking ostracizing yourself. And if this community is what, if these are the people who farm for you and make your clothes and build your houses and such, then yeah, it's a survival situation in some cases.
Next week, I'd hope to get to it this week. Next week, we actually get to see where the Lucan Passion narrative has this story that's going to absolutely break that all up. And and Luke only has this story of the two thieves. The one says, Jesus, I'm on your side. And boom, now the mechanism is broken. There's not unanimity anymore. Whereas in Matthew and Mark, both of them are railing at Jesus. But we'll get to that.
So what would you say are the 2 or 3 takeaways we should have from today? I think you've made the point that that Luke is pushing the scapegoat mimetic contagion point much more than the others. A lesser point that he gives a better role to the women.
Well, I would, and maybe, I don't know if it's just kind of the type of material and how much is there, but the speed with which the mechanism can get up and running from 0 to 60. You know what I mean? The speed here is like 3 days. Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, he's dead. Boom, boom, boom. The mechanism is able to go into full-blown, the mob's yelling, crucify him. I mean, the same mob that Hosanna to the Son of David is now the mob that's crucify him. The speed at which things can change on a dime. The Job experience in that sense, or and I'm not saying that people like Harvey Weinstein or Jeffrey Epstein aren't guilty or not, that the legal system has made their determinations and all of that. But the speed, when you look at when the accusations first came out, the speed with which that the whole mechanism moved to get these men to justice. Once that mechanism starts, it can go very quickly. And that's what makes mobs so absolutely terrifying.
So if we think in historical terms, because it seems as if the chief priests are not actually orchestrating this. They know what they want to happen, but they're not in the position of power until the crowd had the choice of calling out for Barabbas or Jesus. So the crowd are singing Hosanna on one Sunday, and then, whether it's 3 days, 5 days later, they're saying crucify. What is Luke saying is the cause of that flip?
So for Luke, I think that it starts with Satan entering Judas and then watching the mimetic contagion just spread where there's a choice to be made here between being a violent revolutionary or being a pacifist. And Jesus refuses to participate in anything related to a violent revolution. That's number one. Jesus is not a threat in that sense to Caesar. Or as the writer of John would put it, my kingdom is not of this world. If it were, my soldiers would fight. But it's not of this world, so you have no worries. The second thing, as I said, is the speed at which this contagion occurs. Once it starts, it moves rapidly. And then the third thing is, again, the revelation that comes through this new type. It's a new type of victim. It's a forgiving victim. It's a victim that does not either agree with the mob, as in myth, but neither is Jesus a victim in travail. Father, bring me justice. You don't have Jesus going, bring me justice, that kind of thing. You have Jesus asking for forgiveness, and that's the revelation. It's the most powerful revelation that there is in the world, that God should forgive those. He sent the slaves to the far land to deal with the landowners, and they beat them and robbed them and sent them back, and then he sent the Son and they killed them. This is it's very clear that Jesus is the only Barabbas. It's very clear that the crowd makes the wrong choice. It's very clear that they are literally unable to extricate themselves from the mimetic contagion. Even the disciples can't extricate themselves from it. Once it starts up, once you light the fuse, there's only pyrosmos, the choice to fight or die. Once the fuse is lit, once there's the pyrosmos, you either renounce violence or you embrace violence. You go back to the ways of Barabbas, you forsake the ways of Jesus. We do not see Jesus in this narrative at all, in any way, shape, or form, as anything close to what they want to make him out to be, which is a lestes, a violent revolutionary, a nationalistic, violent revolutionary. I mean, even the false charges brought up in the Lucan narrative about, he said we shouldn't pay taxes to Caesar, we know is a lie, because we've seen the narrative already. He doesn't answer that question.
Michael,
Yeah.
I could be reaching here, but when we were reading it, it just popped out to me. So I thought I'd ask you about it. Do you think that there could be certain parallels between Peter's denials and Pilate speaking with the crowd, in that I just noticed that Peter denies him 3 times, Pilate's asked 3 times, and that it's interesting that after Peter denies him 3 times, he's referred to as the Lord, and then Herod sends him back with a robe on, an elegant robe, and then is asked for a 3rd time, and both lead to Jesus kind of getting like acts of violence are taken out on Jesus at that point. Do you think there's parallels there at all?
There certainly could be. I mean, what I would do, Tom, if you want to do this, if you're just looking for those 2, so look at your take your text, put them side by side. Note the parallels. You've already noted the triplicate pattern, right?
Mhm.
Then if there's text between those 2, are there 2 texts between those 2, 3 texts between those 2, 1 text? I mean, is there a larger structure there? So that larger structure, then you can show, yes, there's the triplicate betrayal here, there's the triplicate beating here. And, you know, you've got, you know, your A, B, C prime, B, A kind of thing going.
Yeah.
Possible. That's why I said I didn't sit out and try to carve out the structure of Luke's passion narrative.
Okay.
So I have a question. If the angel and the drops of blood are part of the historical Lucan account, the part of the manuscript tradition, the original manuscript tradition, why would it be dropped out? Why would scribes not put it there?
When I read it, I felt like it painted a very human Jesus, in the sense that like an angel comes to give him strength. He's in that moment kind of asking right before it, like, Father, to remove this cup. He's sweating. He's obviously in great stress. So I don't know if they were trying to, you know, paint him in a more
That spurs a thought now. Who amongst the church fathers omits these verses? Well, you would expect them to be church fathers that don't exactly like flesh, blood, sweat, and semen and that kind of stuff. Marcion, Athanasius, for whom Jesus is the pure logos, right? Athanasius, Origen. Fascinating.
I think you could divide that verse into two. One is about the sweating of blood, which is the human thing, and then the angel comforting him. And you might argue that one was more historical than the other. I mean, I go with Tommy's point about the humanity of the sweating blood, and I think you could make a new creation point in that. But then the angel comforting him is actually, you know, is actually the other side of the Gnostic. That bit is the one that I would have biggest problems with, the angel. But it is in Luke, and as you say, I mean, we talked about this a bit last week about Luke mentioning Satan a couple of times. Apart from John, the others don't talk about it. So whether the angel is here to personify Jesus's reversal of the satanic principle, but it's, I don't know.
For those that have never noticed an angelic experience in their life, or had what could be called an angelic experience, a text like this is very foreign. You know, I'm not a big believer in using my own personal experience for anything, but there is I record kind of a similar type experience in Walking with Grandfather, where we had gone to hell, and I ended up being stalked by a predatory, dark figure. And the only thing that stood between me and this dark figure was this rather tall, 8 to 10 foot tall angel with a sword. I could have made all that stuff up in my head, Richard. It just could all be in my head, right? But for me, it was as clear as day what I was seeing. But I can see why people would look at this and want to demystify it, certainly.
I'm not, no, I don't gainsay that at all. And indeed, you know, no, I would want to support that. It's just that, I guess it's tempting if we say that Jesus had angelic support, as it were, at that moment, it somehow makes more shallow the bottomless depth into which he knew he was diving. So I would want to keep everything you've said and experienced, but say that potentially Jesus had a subjective, as it were, wash of the Father's love back over him, which he interpreted as an angel. But
yeah, an angel just means messenger.
Yeah,
Angelic messenger.
And that, so it's a question of whether, as in your case and many others that I know, that it's an external objective, something that impresses themselves on your experience, or in Jesus's case, whether it's that or whether it's his remembrance of his Father's love was akin to. And I suppose the only reason I'd err towards the latter in this case is that it makes his suffering, it does not diminish his suffering, because in a sense, a bit like some of those Superman things, he is falling into a bottomless pit without any support at all. But apart from the remembrance of his Father's love. But yeah, I mean, I'm conscious that I'm not even understanding what I'm saying.
Well, and I'm just thinking how hard it is for me to just regular life when things are bad to believe that I'm loved by the Father. How hard must it have been for Jesus going through this extraordinary process of rejection and misunderstanding and beating, and ultimately a kangaroo court and an unjust sentence, for the whole time for him to just say, "This is my Father's will." I mean, I can't comprehend that. I cannot, for me, I can't. I just think Jesus had to, I don't know. He still amazes me.
Well, that's why I think I tentatively, humbly suggest that his experience of an angel, if we're to take it as being sort of quasi, as being his reported speech after the event, was not an objective impression on him of an external phenomena, but was his remembrance of his Father's love. That's
Yeah, could be.
But I mean, unless somebody else wants to come in on that, I've got well, I mean, when I went through the various ones, there were some that I spotted. One was in Luke 22:69, which I noticed in Mark and Matthew. They say, you will see the Son of Man seated. And of course, we then ask the question, well, when are they talking about? But Luke actually says, from now, the Son of Man is
Seated. Oh, excellent, Richard. Excellent. I didn't even pick that up. That is excellent.
So with Mark and Matthew, we're thinking of the cross, but with Luke, which is, you know, a few hours away. But with Luke, we're already thinking of the garden, and now we're thinking of the trial, and we're thinking of, as it were, every time Jesus turns aside the chance to bring down 12 legions, every time he does that, he is seated.
I'm curious now. I would have to do some more work on this. Apata noon. From this point on, you shall see.
Well,
From now on, the Son of Man shall be
yeah,
seated
exactly.
at the right hand of the Father.
Whereas the other two have you will see. So, I mean, with the other two, Matthew and Mark, you could say, well, they don't see it until they see it. And, you know, arguably they don't see it until Jesus sits on that sidile seat on the cross.
You know, Luke doesn't even have the verb to see.
Yeah, exactly. That's my point.
Oh, yeah.
That's my point. It's from now he is seated.
Yeah.
So that is a fact. Whereas in the other two, it's a statement, a prediction, a prophecy that you will see at some point, meaning not now, but you will see.
Right. This would be a good saying for us to spend a whole session on, because not only is Luke's Jesus seated at this point in the trial narrative, but there is no second. He eliminates that whole second coming stuff of Mark and Matthew.
The clouds.
Mhm.
Yeah. And and when you say he is seated, he's actually not seated. He's
standing.
Yeah, standing. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, cool. I'll be able to finish up the Passion narrative next week, and I just want to look.
I mean, you've given us a lot of questions to try and answer.
Yeah.
And yeah, I think between us, or that in a sense, we need to try to, you know, to be able to say what it is that Luke is saying here that the others have not reached for. Apart, you know, there's the mimetic contagion, there's the women thing. Is there more? Is there still more? Is there more Christologically? Maybe that bit, you know, is Christological, the seated now, the Satan, you know, that's what does Luke, you know, the one you'd least expect to be talking about,
Right.
unless that is the contagion principle.
Well, I also remind you that God is not present in this narrative, right? You don't have an atonement theory being laid out in this text. You with me?
Yeah. I mean, yeah. In any of them.
Yeah,
I
well,
mean,
but-
unless you actually say that that verse 69 I mentioned, he is seated, unless you somehow turn that into a Christus Victor.
you could,
But then that's Christus Victor. The Christus Victor is the only atonement theory that has God not present or has the Father not present.
yeah, that's right.
I suppose
Well,
another. Yeah.
Even Abelard's doesn't have the Father present. It's only the substitution theory that has the Father present.
I mean, I personally see that the Abelard Christus Exemplar it accounts for 2/3, and Christus Victor is for 1/3. So I'm now big on Abelard, having previously, even 2 years ago, thought he was the weakest because he didn't have some sort of divine mechanism going on,
Right.
which is basically the Janus.
Yeah,
stuff.
he's actually the strongest.
Yes, anthropologically,
Yeah.
yeah.
All right, guys, well, enjoy your week. I'll look forward to seeing you next week. And for those of you in the United States, prepare for the weird weather we have got coming. It's going to be crazy.
Thank you, Michael.
Okay, guys, peace and love.
Thank
Yeah, thanks, Michael. Bye, everyone.
Bye, everybody.